Hi everybody, and welcome to my second of two videos, and in this video about the Canon EOS RT, we're going to learn how to actually use the camera. We're going to start simple with lens mounting and unmounting. Here's your lens. It's got a red dot on top. There's a red dot on top of the mount. Coincidence? I think not. So you line up the two red dots, turn it clockwise about a fifth of a turn, and now it's mounted. And you know it's mounted. You know it's mounted when you hear that little tink sound. To unmount the lens, you push the lens release right here on this side, and then you rotate it counter or anti-clockwise, and then remove the lens. And that's mounting and unmounting the lens. The next thing we're going to do is load film into the camera. And so push down on the lock release and then slide the lever downward. And now we can get into the film chamber. So the film goes into the chamber like in this type of motion. Put it in and rotate it upward and in. Now it lines up between the bumper and the pin here. And then you pull it out until it can slide in just like that. There we go. And now that's lined up, and we just close this, turn it on, and it's ready to go. Because my film does not have a DX code on it, because the cassette doesn't, I've manually set the ISO to 250, which is what I'll be shooting next time. And you can tell that there's film in it because there's those three lines at the bottom next to the film cassette. There we go. So what happens, and because this is an automatic camera, I can't really show you the film being taken up inside of the camera, but needless to say, when you take an image, the shutter activates, and then after it activates, it advances the film a notch. Then when you're done, one interesting thing about this camera that I actually don't care for all that much is that continuous mode is only a 3-shot burst. And then it's done. You have to take your finger off of it and go again. There we go. When you hit the end, it will let you know, and it should have automatically rewound. I thought it did, but if not, then you just push this button, the rewind button. Well, it should automatically rewind the film unless your film comes off of the spool inside the camera, and then it won't automatically rewind the film. Next thing we're going to do is change the battery. This camera requires a 2CR5 battery that is put into the body over here. So what you need to do is grab your nearest Belgian 5 francs coin or something else that will fit into the screw here, the screw top, and then get it started, and then you can just finish it off with your fingers. And then there we go. It pops off to the side. There's a little red clip there that you have to undo. And you can see the red thing there. And there we go. It slides out. Here's the battery type. And there is only one way to put it in, fortunately. Here are some contacts for, here's the contact for the cable release attachment, and here's the receptacle for the grip that screw on, or screw there. So you get the new battery in. So the top of this has a flash hot shoe, and it has a flash sync speed of 1/125th of a second. Now what that means is, let's say that my lamps are in an awkward position. Let's say that this is your shutter. My hand represents your shutter, the shutter right now. And when you take a picture, the shutter curtain opens, and then another one comes in from behind and closes behind it. And then when you take the next picture, the first one closes, it goes, and then, well, anyway, they both close in they both reset in unison without allowing a light to come through. And so what happens is when you have a 1/125th of a second shutter speed, then what happens is the shutter moves up like this, and the 1/125th is the fastest speed at which the entire subject is open to the light at once before the bottom shutter curtain comes in. So at, for instance, let's say 1/250th, the shutter curtains might move like that. At 1/500th, at 1/4000th, it would just be a little tiny gap. Whereas at 1/30th of a second, it'd be a long opening before the second one comes in. So to that end, the way that focal plane shutter curtain cameras increase shutter speed is not by making the shutter physically move faster, but by closing the gap between the shutter curtains so that it's increasingly smaller, so that there's less time for light to get between the shutter curtains. And so your flash will work at 1/125th of a second and any slower speed. Okay, and here we are looking through the viewfinder, and you can tell there is a lot of light loss in this viewfinder, and because of the pellicle mirror. And what we're seeing here is the center frame AF point, and the center AF point roughly indicates what is being spot metered in spot metering mode. The outer circle represents about what is being metered in center weighted metering mode. Okay, there you can see some of the LCD panel at the bottom. And the LCD panel gives you different information about your exposure. It tells you the AF point that you're going to use, whether or not you're in focus. There's that little flashing dot that you might have seen. That's your in focus indicator. And it tells you whether or not you're in manual mode. It tells you if you have exposure compensation on, and that's a little box that has a reversed out plus and a minus in it. And it tells you the shutter speed, the aperture, and whether or not your flash is ready to fire. The focusing mat that we were looking at was the standard AF mat. It is not interchangeable. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at the LCD panel. And we're going to go through that and take a look at all of the functions in the LCD panel. So the first thing is, what is the LCD panel telling us? And along the top, above this black line, you can see it's an AV right now, which means aperture value or aperture priority mode. These are the shooting modes. So we're going to push the mode button here, and this allows, and using the command wheel, we can now select the different modes: full manual, program, shutter value or time value in this, aperture value, and depth of field auto exposure. So full manual mode means that you control the aperture and the shutter speed. Oops, wrong one. There we go. So to control the shutter speed, you just use the command dial. To control the aperture, you push down the LCD panel illumination and rotate the command dial. And that's how you control your aperture and shutter speed. In program mode, you don't control anything. The camera's going to do all the thinking for you. In shutter value, in time value mode, shutter priority mode, you control just the shutter speed and the camera will select the aperture value for you. In aperture priority or aperture value mode, it's the opposite. You control the aperture and the camera will select the shutter speed for you. And I believe that on this camera, the actual shutter speed that it can pick in aperture value mode is stepless, meaning that it can pick anything basically that it wants. In depth of field aperture exposure mode, this maximizes the depth of field, making everything from the center autofocus point backwards towards infinity in focus. So if you're looking at a scene and you've got a person standing in the center autofocus point 10 feet away from you, and they're standing in front of the ocean going out to the horizon, This mode is going to automatically figure out what the camera needs to do to make the person in focus, as well as everything out to the horizon behind them in focus. We also have the shooting modes, or drive modes. Let me turn this back to full manual or here. And the drive modes are there it is. You push the blue button down here for drive mode. And the blue button and the yellow button correspond to the yellow boxes and the blue boxes. So the blue button allows you to go from self-timer, which is I believe it's 10 seconds, to single shot, to continuous, which is a 3-shot burst at 5 frames per second. And you can scroll the other way as well, too. The focus mode, right here, right now I'm in manual focus, so I'm going to switch to autofocus, and then I can switch between AI servo and one shot. So one shot works in common modern terminology like AFS, which is where you push the button down, it will hunt and find a focus for something, and then hold that focus until you take the picture. In AI servo, this works like AFC, which is continuous autofocus, where it will continue hunting for focus as long as you hold the shutter down halfway. And of course there's manual focus as well. But the manual focus switch is on the lens on EOS cameras. Other information that's on the LCD, next to the 1/125th, it can say ISO. And that's if you manually set your film's ISO, which I'll show you how to do. I should not have closed this. Oh, this flap is so hard. There we go. Okay. So to select your ISO, you hit both the yellow and blue buttons, and now you can select your ISO, whatever film speed you want. If you go all the way to the top, which is 6400, which is very good range, and then all the way down to the bottom, which is 6, which is a very low. I mean, this has a very nice range. I didn't actually realize it was that high of ISOs that you can use. So if you do not have a DX code cassette in here, or if you want to override the DX code, that is how you do it. For auto exposure bracketing, you hit the yellow and gray buttons here on the back, and this will allow you, this will take and it's half stop increments up to 5 stops. And what this will do is automatically take let's say we're going to set it to 1.0. Okay, great. And so AEB stays on to let me know that auto exposure bracketing is going to remain on. Now it'll take one shot if I'm in the proper mode. It'll take one shot that is a full stop underexposed, one shot that is properly exposed, and one that is overexposed. And that's useful if you don't know exactly what the lighting situation is going to cause the image to look like on film, or just for security to make sure that you get the best images that you can. So I'm going to turn this back to 0, and when I do that, auto exposure bracketing turns off. Okay, so I'm going to go back up here. We're going to talk about exposure compensation and multiple exposures. For exposure compensation, you can over or underexpose intentionally your images. Now this is useful for some lenses, such as some telephotos require that you compensate your exposure. Then the other thing you can do is, if you know that let's say you're out and you're taking pictures of snow. Well, the way that a meter works, the way that your camera's meter works, is that whatever it sees, it assumes that that is 18 or 12% gray, depending on how it's calibrated. So when it sees this white snowy field in front of it, the meter just that it's gray. So it's going to expose the image to make the snow look gray. Well, you don't really want that with snow, so you want to overexpose it, maybe 1.5 or 2 stops. And now you'll get a proper reading for your images. Likewise, let's say you were in a cave and you took your meter reading, and it said, okay, everything's going to take 9 minutes to expose. Well, not really. You don't want it to be gray in the cave. You don't want it to be well illuminated. It should look dark because caves are dark. So you tell it to underexpose a little bit. And so exposure compensation can be very useful if you're in a situation with lighting conditions that can trick your camera's meter. Multiple exposures. This is how you do double exposures on this camera. And you can do up to 9 at a time. And this will stay on until you turn it off. And if you don't turn it off, it will continue to take double or triple and nay it properly. So that's it. That is the Canon EOS RT. In just a minute, we will show you some photos I've taken with this actual camera right here. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. I'm pretty good about responding in fairly quick turnaround. If you have ideas for videos, please let me know, and if I have the technical knowledge and equipment, I'm more than happy to film those for you. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, because that will let you know when I have new videos that come out about photography and things like that. And one last thing before we take a look at photos from this camera. Thank you guys for watching.